Okay, so today we're going on a deep dive into something I find fascinating,
Yeah.
and that's the three-string double bass.
Uh-huh.
Um, you sent us a lot of stuff on this.
Yeah.
We've got Wikipedia articles, a Talk Bass forum thread, and even some excerpts from Bottesini's method book.
Wow.
So it looks like you're pretty curious about the history of this thing and why it's not that common today.
Yeah, it really is a curiosity nowadays.
Yeah?
Nobody starts on a three-string bass these days.
Right, exactly.
So it's sort of like
A historical, a relic.
a relic of a bygone era
Yeah.
of a different time.
So today we're going to kind of unpack this
Okay,
and
great.
explore the evolution of the three-string bass and how we got to the four-string instrument
Right.
that everybody knows and loves today.
And what's so fascinating is that the three-string bass kind of forces us to look back at the entire history of the double bass.
Yeah.
And the history is surprisingly debated.
Really?
Yeah, some people think it's descended from the viol family.
Oh.
Others think it came from the violin family.
Huh.
So it's not a simple answer.
Well, the Wikipedia article actually talked about it,
Yeah.
sort of having characteristics of both.
Yes, yeah.
Like the deeper body
Yes.
and the sloped shoulders
Yeah.
sound kind of like a viol.
Right. And then you've got an instrument called the violone,
Okay.
which was this 15th century chordophone
Okay.
that some musicologists believe is like a direct ancestor of the double bass.
Interesting.
But what's really fascinating is that before the 20th century, a lot of basses only had 3 strings. Which is odd, considering that in the viol family, most instruments had 5 or 6 strings.
Right?
And then the violin family, of course, standardized on 4 strings.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an outlier.
So the three-string bass wasn't just like a passing fad.
Yeah.
It was like
A big chunk.
centuries of the instrument's history.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And to understand its evolution, you've really got to consider technology.
Oh.
And specifically string technology.
All right.
So the invention of overwound gut strings back in the 1650s,
Ooh.
this was a game changer.
Yeah. No, what was so special about the overwound strings?
Well, to get lower pitches, you generally need thicker strings.
Right.
But those thick strings are really hard to play.
Yeah.
Especially if you're playing fast passages or something like that.
Right.
So overwound strings allowed for those lower notes without requiring a super thick string. So it's kind of like, you wrap a thinner string with a metal wire
Right.
to add mass without making it too thick.
Oh, so it was like a playability thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, Professor Larry Hurst,
Ooh.
he argued that without this innovation, the double bass might have struggled to survive.
Wow.
Because could you imagine trying to play,
Yeah.
these complex bass lines we hear in classical music on super thick strings?
Yeah, I can see that being a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
It makes you wonder if the three-string configuration was also trying to do the same thing, make it easier to play.
It could have been, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have the eventual transition from gut strings to steel strings,
Right.
which had a massive impact on the double bass.
Yeah.
The Talk Bass forum discussion really highlighted some of the key differences.
Yeah, and people were pretty passionate on there
They were,
about the pros and cons of each.
as they should be,
Yeah.
because steel strings offered a lot more stability. They weren't as susceptible to changes in humidity and temperature.
Yeah.
And they were louder.
Yeah.
So these were all really big advantages.
Yeah, especially if you're playing in an orchestra or something.
Absolutely, especially for orchestral playing.
Yeah.
But those older gut strings,
Yeah.
especially those overwound ones, were crucial in allowing the three-string bass to even exist.
It seems like every step of the way,
Yeah,
this thing's evolving based on technology.
right.
It's like musicians wanted to express something,
Yes.
but they were kind of limited by...
By what they could actually do. By the technology.
By what was available to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to some of the giants
Okay.
who shaped the world of the double bass.
Oh.
Players like Giovanni Bottesini, often called the Paganini of the bass,
Okay.
who was known for his incredible virtuosity.
Yeah.
His compositions were so challenging that some musicians of his time considered them almost unplayable.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So these individuals really pushed the limits
They did.
of what you could do on this instrument.
Yeah, they pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible.
Yeah.
And then there was Domenico Dragonetti,
Okay.
who was renowned for his mastery of the three-string bass.
Wow.
And he was so influential
Yeah.
that composers like Beethoven started writing more intricate and demanding bass parts.
Wow.
Inspired by Dragonetti's abilities.
So it wasn't just some, like, primitive version of the instrument.
It wasn't just a stepping stone to something better.
Yeah.
It was an instrument capable of incredible artistry and expression.
Right, yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And this is really where we get into the heart of your question about the three-string bass.
Yeah.
Like, why did some bass players prefer it, even when the four-string was becoming more common?
Yeah, like Bottesini.
Yeah.
He really seemed to believe in the excerpt we have from his method book that adding a fourth string, while it gave you those lower notes, came at a cost.
He felt that the fourth string, while it offered a wider range, it kind of sacrificed some of the sonic qualities of the three-string.
Interesting.
Yeah. He even talked about experimenting with adding a fourth string to famous basses like the Gaspar de Salo, and claiming that it actually led to a loss of clarity and resonance in the sound.
So he wasn't just being a grumpy old man or
He wasn't just resistant to change.
Yeah.
He genuinely believed that the three-string instrument offered something unique in terms of sound.
Okay.
Yeah, he even tells a story about trying to convince a friend to remove a fourth string that had been recently added from his bass, arguing that it would actually make the instrument sound better.
Really? Wow. That's amazing.
It is amazing.
That these musicians were so passionate about those nuances of their instruments.
Absolutely.
But if he and these other guys thought that way, why did the fourth string ultimately become the standard?
This is where those technological advancements we talked about earlier really come into play.
Oh, okay.
You know, those steel strings, especially for the lower notes?
Right.
Made a huge difference.
Was that because the thick gut E string?
Yeah, the gut E string
is such a pain.
was notoriously difficult to tune and play.
Okay.
So with the advent of steel strings, those lower notes became much more accessible and reliable.
Yeah, like if you're writing music for this thing, you don't have to worry.
Exactly.
You don't have to worry about whether the bass player can actually hit those notes cleanly and in tune.
And if you're in an orchestra,
absolutely,
you need that.
You need consistency. You need power. And so it makes sense that those practical considerations would eventually win out. And then, of course, the tuning system that eventually became standard for the double bass. Tuning in fourths further cemented the dominance of the four-string instrument.
But there are still people today that prefer fifths, right?
Absolutely.
Or is
that's a whole other
another rabbit hole?
Fascinating rabbit hole that we could go down.
Okay.
But in the context of this three versus four string debate, the standardization on tuning in fourths really favored the four string instrument.
So it sounds like a combination of things.
Yeah, it was a confluence of factors.
The string technology, the tuning, and just the practical demands of playing at a big orchestra or something.
Yeah, the practical demands of orchestral playing, for sure.
But it wasn't just about that.
No, it wasn't just about technology or practicality. It was also a shift in musical taste. And the kinds of sounds that composers and musicians were seeking.
So the three-string bass might have just fallen out of favor.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
You know, as musical styles evolved.
Even the concept of a standard tuning. Like, that's changed over time, too.
It has, You know, the Viennese tuning with its ADF Sharpit configuration was dominant for a while, even on five-string basses.
It's amazing how much experimentation and evolution.
It's amazing.
Constant evolution.
With the double bass.
It's not just about adding or subtracting strings.
It's about finding the best way to make this instrument sing.
And that brings us to, I think, another important aspect of this discussion.
Pedagogy.
Okay.
Like, how is the double bass taught and learned? And there's a really stark contrast between the classical and jazz worlds compared to like blues and rockabilly and psychobilly.
Yeah, the Wikipedia article talked about that a little bit.
It did.
In the classical and jazz world, it's much more
structured,
formal and structured.
Yeah, you've got established methods like Simondl and Nanny. You've got entire academic programs dedicated to double bass performance, whereas in like blues, rockabilly, psychobilly,
it's way more loosey-goosey, right?
It's way more informal. Often relying on self-teaching through books, recordings, or like learning directly from more experienced players
Like a hands-on.
would take an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting how the learning process shapes the way the instrument is perceived.
It does.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder if the decline of the three-string bass is also partly due to the evolution of pedagogy.
Like maybe they thought you had to learn on the simpler instrument first and then move up.
Right.
It's like training wheels on a bike.
Exactly. Yeah. And to bring it back to your original question, if nobody starts on a three-string bass today, it becomes harder to appreciate its unique qualities.
Right.
It becomes harder to understand why someone like Bottesini held it in such high regard.
Yeah.
It's like a language that fewer and fewer people speak.
Right.
Yeah.
So the three-string bass might not be that common today.
Yeah.
But its history
Yeah.
and the reasons for its use give us this valuable window into how the double bass has evolved.
Absolutely.
And the whole changing landscape of musical expression.
It's a reminder that even seemingly obsolete instruments have fascinating stories to tell, stories that can deepen our understanding of music and the people who make it.
And speaking of stories, you mentioned Bill Johnson earlier.
I did.
As a jazz bass player.
Yeah.
Didn't he own a three-string bass?
He did own a three-string bass, but most of the pictures of him show him playing a four-string.
Really?
Yeah.
So even someone who is...
Right, even someone steeped in that tradition ultimately kind of embraced the four-string.
It's like the four-string ultimately won out.
Yeah, it seems like it did.
Even for people who really like the three-string.
It's a testament to how instruments, like music itself, are constantly evolving.
Yeah.
There's this push and pull between tradition and innovation.
Yeah.
And in the case of the double bass, it seems like those innovations ultimately led to the three-string bass becoming more of a historical curiosity.
A reminder of a different era.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, in the instrument's evolution.
It makes you wonder if there are other instruments out there that are seemingly obsolete today, but have similar fascinating stories behind them.
Yeah, it makes you realize that music history is more than just dates and names.
Absolutely.
It's these stories of innovation and these people who shape the sounds that we hear today.
It's amazing.
This has been a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
I had no idea how much history and technological evolution was packed into just the number of strings on a bass.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what the bass of the future will look like.
Right.
What new innovations are out there that could reshape our understanding of this instrument once again.
Are there modern luthiers out there who are experimenting?
Experimenting with new design.
New materials.
New materials.
Are we going to add more strings to this thing?
Who knows? Maybe one day we'll be doing a deep dive on 5 or 6 string basses.
I can't wait. This has been an absolutely incredible journey.
It has.
Through the world of the three-string bass.
It's been a real pleasure exploring these sources with you.
Yeah, big thanks to you.
Yeah.
For joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
It's funny to think that what we consider like normal today could be seen as a historical curiosity in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the evolution of musical instruments is a continuous process driven by both technological innovation and just the changing demands of musical expression. So who knows? Maybe someday the 4-string double bass will be just as quaint
like a relic
as the 3-string bass is to us now.
That's a great point. Yeah. It makes you realize that we're always learning new things.
Always.
About these instruments, even the ones
we think we know.
We think we know. Yeah. But it seems like going back to the sources, it was fairly common to actually transition from 3 to 4 strings.
Absolutely. And musicians like Tim Miller are a great example of this. He was initially known for playing a 3-string bass, but eventually adopted the 4-string as his main instrument.
And it seems like that often coincided with the move from gut to steel strings.
Exactly. Particularly when those lower steel strings became more readily available.
Right. Because those lower steel strings.
Yes, they solved a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Particularly that pesky low E string.
It was a pain.
Which was just a nightmare with gut.
Yeah.
So it made those lower notes much easier to play and to tune.
Right. And it opened up new possibilities for composers and stuff.
Absolutely. And for orchestral playing.
Right.
Where precision and consistency are so important.
You need that, yeah.
I can see why those steel strings were a game changer.
So it wasn't just a convenience thing.
No, it was also about a sonic shift.
Right.
That really resonated with composers and musicians.
Right, like the sound just changed.
The sound change, yeah. And it's worth noting that even with the, the 4-string double bass kind of being dominant now,
right,
there's still a lot of variation and experimentation within the instrument itself.
Like what?
Well, like the whole debate
about
tuning in fourths versus tuning in fifths.
Right, the Talk Best people.
Yeah, the Talk Best forum.
We're really into that.
Oh, they love that debate.
Yeah.
And it seems like some bass players, especially in genres like jazz or early music, still prefer tuning in fifths.
And it's not just because they're stubborn?
No, it's not just personal preference.
Yeah.
Different tuning systems lend themselves to different playing styles, different harmonies, even different ways of approaching the instrument.
So it's almost like different tunings are like different languages on the double bass.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it highlights the fact that even within the seemingly standardized world of the 4-string double bass, there's still this ongoing exploration of possibilities.
Yeah.
This desire to kind of push the boundaries.
Yeah, like what can we do?
Of what the instrument can do.
With this thing.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been quite the journey.
It has.
Starting from
it really has.
What seemed like such a simple question.
A simple question.
About the 3-string bass.
Yeah.
And it's uncovered all this...
this history.
This rich history and...
technological evolution.
The passion of all these musicians who championed... different approaches and it's just this constant
back and forth between tradition and innovation.
Yeah, and I think beyond just the 3 versus 4-string thing, what really stands out to me is that reminder that musical instruments, they're not static objects.
They're not. They're constantly evolving.
Yeah.
They reflect the creativity and the ingenuity of the people who play them and the ever-changing soundscape
of the musical world.
That's beautifully put.
It's been a real pleasure exploring these sources with you.
Likewise.
And I hope our listeners have a deeper appreciation for the double bass.
For this complex and fascinating instrument.
Yeah.
And who knows what the future holds?
Who knows?
For the double bass?
What exciting innovations and transformations await?
Yeah, we'll have to stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
A huge thank you to you.
To all our listeners.
For joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
We'll be back soon.
We'll be back.
With another fascinating exploration of the musical world.
Until then, keep those ears open and those minds curious.
Absolutely.